Okay, I'll start at 103.
Sounds good.
Okay, I want to welcome everybody to our panel today to discuss year 15 issues. This panel will go until 1:45 unless we go a bit over. We've got three excellent panelists today. My name, by the way, is Bobby Rosen. I'm a policy attorney who has been working on the nonprofit side of low-income housing tax credit uh, industry for many years. I'm a member of VHA. I'm a board member of the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing. And I've been spending a lot of time in recent years working on issues around rights of first refusal that come up for nonprofit ownership of affordable housing. But our discussion today is going to be broader than nonprofit ownership. We're also going to talk about for-profit ownership, and an issue that has arisen in recent years and seems to be escalating to a great extent today, where nonprofit and for-profit general partners, when year 15 rolls around, and they're looking for a means for getting the limited partners, the investors out of the deal. What we're finding today is increasing pushback from investors who want a piece of the action. They want residual value. They want to take assets out of the partnership or force a sale of the property. This is a phenomenon that has particularly accelerated as a result of the entrance into this industry from companies called aggregators, where outside capital has come in and acquired control of limited partnerships where the credits have been taken. In for-profit deals, issues have arisen over the exercise of the purchase option at fair market value. It's resulted in disputes and litigation. And on the nonprofit side, issues have arisen as a result of the desire of the nonprofit to have the limited partner exit the deal through a right of first refusal that the nonprofit has in the property. It not only happens with these companies we call aggregators, but increasingly it's happened from old line syndication companies, for-profit syndication companies, who in some cases they've acquired other syndicators, or they're taking the partnerships where they're the general partner or the limited partnership, and they have decided that a good source of income is squeezing money out of these properties. So on today's call today, our first speaker will be Ellen Lurie Hoffman. Ellen is Federal Policy Director at the National Housing Trust, which is a national nonprofit engaged in affordable housing development and debt lending, which has a very robust policy arm, which Alan heads up. They work at both the federal and state level on preservation issues. Our second speaker is David Davenport, a partner with the law firm of Winthrop and Weinstein in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And in recent years, David, who is a trial lawyer, has developed a specialty representing both for-profit and nonprofit general partners in these disputes with investors. And then finally, Mike Vickers, is an accountant with Dooley and Vickers in Richmond, Virginia, and he has extensive experience in the affordable housing industry, particularly working on low-income housing tax credit deals. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Ellen. And Ellen, you can go ahead and give a little more background about what you're doing for NHT and for this cause.
Great, thank you, Bobby, and thanks for this opportunity to speak today. I have some slides which I'm going to attempt to share, so bear with me. And how's that?
Good to go.
Great, thank you. So I'm not going to go through everything on these slides, but they are posted on the conference website because they have some information on them, but I just want to give you an overview. So as Bobby said, the National Housing Trust is a national nonprofit organization. Whoops. Sorry. And we're based in DC, and we have a history of focusing on preservation, and we are a real estate developer and owner. We own a few properties in Virginia. We also have a CDFI, and we're focused on energy efficiency, and we have always done policy work. We've expanded a little bit beyond preservation, but preservation is really at our heart, and that is why we are very concerned about this trend. I wanted to just give a sense of the scope of the problem. We know that any property that has especially those with a nonprofit general partner could be at risk of this trend of limited partners preventing them from exercising their right of first refusal or taking resources out of the property. And the best data we could find was from the National Housing Preservation Database. And really, all we know is that these properties have low-income housing tax credits and that they're owned by nonprofits. But you can get a sense from looking at them, at this data, of what the universe is of the number of those properties that fall into that category and where they are in the life of the housing credit allocation. So almost 2,000 properties approaching year 15, almost 5,000 approaching year 30, and then you can see the difference, those that are in between year 15 and year 30. And then I thought the audience would be interested in the scope of the threat to these properties in Virginia, specifically about 34 properties with housing credits and a nonprofit owner approaching year 15, 120 approaching year 30. So why do we care about this? Bobby talked a little bit about what is happening and the trend that we're seeing. It's important to recognize that in these situations, when a limited partner is not agreeing to release the nonprofit to become the owner of the property after year 15, or if they're either blocking the right of first refusal or leveraging a cash payment from the property, they are leaving scarce funds available for that mission-driven nonprofit and for the continued viability of the affordable housing. And we know this is contrary to the intent of Congress in creating the program. Traditionally, this has not been a problem. Traditionally, investors have understood that their return for investing in low-income housing tax credits are the housing credit subsidies themselves and not some expectation of residual value. But the trend that we're seeing is alarming, and I'll get into some more information about why. So obviously, we believe that housing credit properties are far more likely to continue operating as affordable housing into perpetuity if they're left in the hands of a mission-driven nonprofit dedicated to that purpose. These transfer disputes drain the nonprofit partners' resources, and those are resources that otherwise would be devoted to resident services, to building maintenance, to other affordable housing initiatives that the nonprofit is engaged in the community. And these sales at market value or the extraction of resources from the property will leave either the nonprofit or the new owner with fewer resources to devote to operations and maintenance and services. also want to point out that the resources that are being drained are not just being drained from one particular property, but from a nonprofit, the community in which a nonprofit operates, and their ability to serve that community. We know that many mission-driven nonprofits that develop affordable housing are also providing services, education, and training to the broader community. And what we've seen in some of these disputes is that there is actually a racial equity component where you have national corporations coming in and preventing the exercise of the right of first refusal or extracting resources from a property. They're taking those resources not just away from the property, but from the broader community. And that often has a detrimental racial equity component for not letting the community members benefit from that organization that is invested in their community. I also just want to highlight the fact that this trend is, we really recognize it as a no holds barred war to maximize profits at the detriment of the properties, the residents, and the communities. And there are several different aspects of this. The litigation you've heard a little bit about, and David will tell you a lot more about that. We also have language that had previously been in the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, a federal bill to modify the low-income housing tax credit and expand its allocation. And there have the aggregators and other interests who are trying to push back against the right of first refusal have hired very high-paid lobbyists to go to Congress and resist that language and oppose it. They've also been publishing articles in industry journals espousing their opinion. And of course, I think folks are probably familiar with the corporate consolidation that's gone on with Oryx and Boston Financial acquiring Boston Capital and Hunt Real Estate's housing credit practices, really creating a mega aggregation, I would say. So National Housing Trust has been working on all of these efforts. We're not litigators, but we support the efforts of litigation. We are working on language to address this situation and to clarify the intent of Congress that would be in federal legislation next year. We have taken the offensive in publishing against industry journals. And most importantly, we're just trying to educate stakeholders, state housing finance agencies, local governments, and especially the nonprofit community so that they understand that this is, when they see these situations, it's not a one-off, it's really part of a trend. So I will turn it back to Bobby and happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Bobby, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Our next speaker is David Davenport, who more than any attorney in the country has been in court engaging these limited partners who are, as Ellen said, at war with nonprofits. And Dave has also done perhaps more work on the for-profit side. So go ahead, Dave.
Hi, everybody. Again, I want to echo our thanks for everybody taking the time today to listen in and hopefully become engaged after hearing some of the information we're going to share, because it's critical in our minds for the preservation of affordable housing and other issues, as Ellen mentioned. My law firm is based in Minneapolis. I began as a lawyer in 1998 and quickly found myself gravitating towards trial work and wanting to be in court for a variety of different reasons. I just kind of met my personality. And over time, I started lending myself more towards real estate development type work and land use, and eventually landed in this LIHTC space, largely because of the broader work that our firm does on the development side. And it was 2013 when Common Bond Communities, largest nonprofit in Minnesota, had a problem with the right of first refusal. They were trying to execute on that. And maybe just to back up a little bit in terms of who we have in the audience, I'd normally say raise your hand if you know what a right of first refusal in LIHTC is, but you could raise your hand and I won't see it, unfortunately. But generally, what the program does is it creates this special incentive to get nonprofit participation in affordable housing. And it allows for a debt plus taxes acquisition of property after the end of the 15-year compliance period. So it's a really nice tool that can be used for nonprofits to help benefit from and engage on capital equity that builds up in these projects after 15 years. So they can come in, they can acquire the project, assume the debt, pay a modest exit tax, and now they own a piece of real estate that hopefully has appreciated in time over 15 years and maybe has some equity in it. And then you can access and tap into that equity, generate capital, and reinvest in your community, reinvest in your project, do a lot of different things for your tenants in your community. It's a wonderful tool. So Common Bond was trying to execute on this right of first refusal, and the investor was trying to prevent them based on a typo in the document. And when I say a typo, I really mean a typo. I mean, my third grade son could have looked at it and said, that makes no sense, it's a typo. So ultimately, long story short, we litigated for a year or so, and we won, and the court reformed it, and Common Bond acquired the property. Within the next year and a half or two, I then found myself representing two different for-profit developers who were having a problem with their quote unquote investor. But they really weren't the original investor. They had acquired the position. They acquired the investor limited partner positions in the two different deals. One was in northern Minnesota, the other one was in southern Minnesota. And they were facing the same fight, which was they needed to refinance the debt. The debt was coming due at the end of the compliance period. The permanent loan was set to mature. And both limited partners were saying, we're not going to allow you to. You need our consent. Borrow some money, lever the property up, and give us a big payout. And then we'll consent, and then we'll leave your deal. Our clients weren't interested in that. That wasn't the deal. That wasn't the design. That wasn't good for the tenants. That wasn't good for the capital needs of the property that had, come due after 15 years. So we ended up in litigation and, fighting with them, and the court in both instances allowed us to refinance without their consent and found that they had breached their duties and obligations to us. And so then we got past those cases. And now I'm sitting there and I'm saying, wow, that's 3 cases in the same industry at the same event in the life of that partnership called the compliance period. And so started talking to our clients and saying, this is too much of a coincidence to be, making any sense to me. And they said, no, there's a problem. And they started describing for me these institutions that we had just litigated against had come into the deals after the fact. In the case in northern Minnesota, it was a group called Alden Torch Financial. In the case down in Rochester, Minnesota, southern Minnesota, it was a group called Wentwood Capital Advisors. They had come into a management position within the investment fund, and they were driving this ship, and they were, creating this. And I said, well, okay, well, come to find out, they've bought into deals just like this all over the country. They stepped into things that have been syndicated by Paramount, things that have been syndicated by Red Capital, things that have been syndicated by Centerline. And so really kind of started studying it and saying, oh my gosh, this is a really bad thing that these folks are trying to accomplish. So our client, Dominium, Brent Rustin, said, you know what, come with me. I'll take you all around every industry conference that there is, and we'll just introduce you to people we know. So the Dominium ownership did that. And it was quite nice, right? Because now you're starting to meet folks, nonprofit folks, for-profit developers, and everybody's kind of saying the same thing. Yeah, these guys are really trying to turn our deals upside down. So wrote an article about it for Tax Credit Advisor, talked about those disputes, talked about what the mass aggregation has produced, and it's this aggregator moniker. And now as you start digging and researching and meeting people and talking to people, more people have the same stories, and they need help. They need to share their stories across the industry. They need to make sure that the policymakers understand. They need to make sure that the housing credit allocation agencies and commissions in the states know what's going on the ground of these projects. And so started talking, doing some seminars, and then relationships are built, and lots of disputes have been litigated, since that first one with Common Bond. It's the end of 2020. I've had litigation in over 25 states involving hundreds of thousands of units of affordable housing, more than 40 to 45 disputes. We're probably ahead of 50 now. And they range from the disputes that I just described in terms of refinancing, leveraging a consent right to prevent a refinance to try to force a cash payout. They range from rights of first refusal litigation, where the investor says, sorry, you need our consent in order to sell the property, and we're not going to consent to a sale, so your ROFR can never be triggered. Well, we have a letter of intent come in from somebody who wants to buy it. Sorry, that's non-binding, it's not going to trigger. They're doing everything they can to prevent the orderly transition of ownership at the end of year 15, as intended by the original investor limited partner. They're not an investor. They're not looking to do new deals. They've aggregated interest in deals and are trying to extract maximum value. An example in a purchase option setting, if a general partner has a purchase option to acquire the property or acquire the project, but there's a large positive capital account that's built up on the investor balance sheet, they're saying, turn that into cash. You want to exit us? Hypothetical dissolution and liquidation of the partnership, not just a valuation of the partnership interest, or not just a hypothetical sale that yields maybe 10% of the sale proceeds. They want to actually model a liquidation of the partnership and drive millions of dollars into their pockets. An example of such tactic was for a client of mine out in Seattle in 2018 and 2019. Downtown Action to Save Housing, they had 4 properties. The new person in the deal was Boston Financial Investment Management. They had acquired and stepped into the shoes of Midland MMA through a variety of transactions. Dash was trying to use reserves to fix decks for their elderly senior residents, and they couldn't get consent. And then they got run up to year 15 and tried to exit Boston Financial, and they said, we see resyndication value in all 4 of these properties. We think if you aggregate them together, you'll be able to go in for an application and it'll produce X dollars of benefit. So give us $1 million and we'll exit. And they know we can't exit, we can't resyndicate if they're still in our deal. So they're literally trying to hold us hostage. Said, can't do it. We're not going to, we can't do this. And followed the language in the partnership agreement. We had a purchase option. We had a purchase option that allowed us to acquire their interests based on the economic rights that those interests would have after they were gone. Well, after year 15, most investor limited partners don't have much economic interest in a deal. They have credits, they're gone. Losses, not much. So, we end up in court. We got a summary judgment decision that they had breached. And ultimately, we had damages that we were pursuing. And the net was they just turned over the keys to all 4 deals and we got them for 0. And it's unfortunate because during the interim, our seniors still didn't have decks because we didn't have the money, right? So they held it up. I think I'm coming up on 10 minutes, Bobby. Folks, I can tell you I have a lot more stories to share. They can be pretty aggressive. They range from physical, forcible raids on properties where they bring security guards and locksmiths and new property management folks and literally show up and say, we're kicking you out because we think you've done something wrong. And if you have any desire or concern or question, feel free to reach out after. I think all our information is available. In the materials that we posted with the link, there's the document that Ellen and I and Linda Kaus from Leading Age put together. It's called 10 Red Flags in LIHTC Deals. I would urge each of you to get it, print 5 copies and give them to your 4 closest friends and keep 1 for yourself. If you have any number of those in your deals, you may have a problem and you don't know it. And so the best takeaway that I would have is be prepared, get ready, know your partner, figure out if you're going to have a problem, and try to engage with somebody who's got the experience to help you plan and hopefully prevent what we're seeing across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And before I turn to Mike, I want to remind folks that if you have questions, you can pose a question in either the chat box or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Mike, why don't you tell us about this issue from the perspective of your work as an accountant?
Sure. I must say that hearing some of that is a little disturbing there, but and because where I stand, most of the work here is in Virginia that we do. We haven't run into some of these issues, I guess, that is going on maybe across the country, and some here. As far as the deals that we have, most of them have been pretty easy exits. And if there were conflicts, they kind of worked themselves out over a couple of years or so, and everybody walked away happy. So what I thought I'd do is kind of share with you how to actually look at your project and kind of see where you are in the deal. First thing I do, I would dig out that operating agreement that you have. You may not have been the person that was there when this deal first was done. So get it out, take a look at it, go through, kind of look at it, know your options, get with your tax attorney, your accountant, and kind of see where you are with the project. In that operating agreement, you may find things like the first right of refusal, if you sell the property, what's going to happen, and things like that. And you need to kind of look at your project, where, understand your loans, your reserves, how you performed as the time has gone over. Hopefully you're doing this somewhere around year 10 or 11, not at the last minute. So you kind of get there, review your reserves, if they're, project reserves or partnership reserves, because those are things that project reserve basically has to stay with the project, where a partnership reserve is available. If what reserve balances you have and things of that sort. Know how the waterfall works in your project, how cash is distributed. And when you're talking to your investor partner, hopefully you will do that somewhere around that, and kind of get a feel for where they are in the deal, because the person you sat across the table from in the beginning may not be the same person that's there when you get to year 14, 15. So, and the biggest thing, know your capital accounts, your tax capital accounts. So you flip out that audit, that's not the ones you're going to be looking at. You need to find your tax capital accounts, whether you have a large positive capital account, or is it still positive? Is it negative? Most of the time when you have negative capital accounts, you have an issue with exit taxes and what the partner is looking for there. And the biggest thing that in doing these and basically going through in these exits is getting with your investor limited partner early. Know what their expectations are of you. Know whether, maybe they just, they've got their credits, they got their losses, they're good to go. Thanks. It's been great doing business with you. But then if that's not the case, then maybe you can try to, look at what you've done for them and where you're going to end up. And if it's going to be a hard exit, basically coming up. Planning is key, knowing your operating agreement, knowing your project, and getting a feel for your investor when that year 15 rolls around, because you don't want to, I don't think anybody wants to end up in litigation. Things to look at. So, but with that, I'll turn it back over to Bobby.
Okay, thank you, Mike. One thing that I want to stress for everybody, Mike said, know your investor, talk to your investor, is that regardless of what kind of relationship you had with your equity partner at the outset of your agreement, and how good an organization you think they have, and how safe you think you are. The problem is that they can transfer their interest, control of the limited partnership to these aggregators, to these outside parties. And then whatever relationship you had is out the window, and you've got to deal with somebody different, somebody who has different motivations. Most of these companies are no longer in the origination business if they ever were in the origination business. And the reason is once you are in dispute and the industry learns how you operate, it's harder to originate deals. Some of them are still in it, and they'll offer, as we talked about earlier, a few cents more for your deal because when you are developing a property, you are so focused on getting every last penny on the equity side that you sometimes lose focus on the implications for year 15. So let me ask you, Ellen, what does the National Housing Trust do in its new deals to anticipate potential problems down the road?
Thanks, Bobby. Well, so, right, have been in the real estate development business for, I think 10 to 15 years. I'm not sure the exact date we got engaged. And we haven't had a dispute, but we are very worried that we could have one. So in our new partnership agreements, we are putting specific provisions of who we will not allow to be the interests of the limited partners to be transferred to. We have a list of actors that we're aware of that are involved in these disputes, and we have listed them. One other approach that we've thought about and that we've discussed with some of our partners is to describe the characteristics of some of those, because we know that any entity can always create a related party and change the name, and names change over time. But I think an alternative is to specify that the limited partner interest should not be transferred to anyone that has been engaged in litigation related to these issues. That's another way of getting through it. But so far we have a list of actors that we will not do business with in the partnership agreement.
I see. And David, I believe that the HFA in Washington, the tax credit allocator, issued a policy around who a limited partnership interest can be transferred to, and there's some litigation around that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So Washington State Housing Finance Commission, WSFC, last year, under the leadership of Keith Herman, he's now retired, but he was the executive director. They recognized this problem. They had 3 pieces of litigation going on out there in 2018 and 2019. One was the Dash case that I mentioned, and then there were 2 other cases. And they saw this problem, and they were concerned and remain concerned about their housing stock and what this is going to do. One of those cases went horribly wrong for a nonprofit, and they lost over 1,900 units of affordable housing from their portfolio as a result. And so what the commission was looking at was the long-term policy implications of this, and they published a white paper. And again, if anybody wants that, let us know. I can get it for you, but it was in the fall of last year. And then they also, in their policy manual, provided for a couple of things. If you're coming in seeking a new allocation, they want to know, in addition to who the partners are, where your equity is coming from, has anybody in the deal ever been involved in litigation around affordable housing? If so, tell us what that's about. And then on the back end, transfer consideration requirements and consent from the commission for if you're in the middle of the deal and you want to transfer an interest, you need commission consent. Same disclosure. You ever been involved in litigation? If so, what's it about? It's designed to figure this out from a policy standpoint. And then a couple of weeks ago, Alton Torch Financial thought it would be a good idea to sue the commission and all 12 or 10 of its volunteer board members, claiming that they've engaged in unconstitutional activity and all sorts of other stuff. And, you know, they were also apparently upset that I was invited to participate and speak on a panel at last year's Washington State Housing Finance Commission because it's referenced in their complaint. And they were frustrated that they weren't invited. Sorry. But, you know, in any event, it's a full-on assault. It doesn't just stop with nonprofits who lack the resources oftentimes to fight this back. It doesn't stop with the developers who are the for-profit who may have the resources or also may not. Now they're coming after the commission for trying to focus on policy and claiming that the commission doesn't have the right to do anything other than allocate credits and cannot make policy decisions in the allocation decisions that it's making. Come on, right? So they're just going to drive the commission through litigation. They got, you know, big law firms, Perkins Coie, King Spalding, deep resources, and you know, it's unfortunate, but they're out for blood.
So, David, let me ask you: in a for-profit deal, what are the key issues that drive these disputes on the for-profit side? And then I want you to tell me on the nonprofit side.
Yeah, so oftentimes it's going to be a couple, 3-4 different things for the for-profit side. What are your option rights? Do you have an option to purchase the project at the end of the compliance period? Do you have an option to purchase the limited partner interest in the partnership at the end of the compliance period? Those are two very different things. And you know, somebody like Mike can tell you that you look at numbers based upon values. If you're buying somebody's interest in a business, that's like buying personal property. What are those shares worth? That's different than selling the project, bringing capital proceeds into the partnership, and then distributing them under a waterfall. One event should produce a dramatically different number than the other. So there's fights about that. Like, how do you do those values? Should it be a hypothetical sale of the project, hypothetical sale of a partnership interest? Then just fighting over the appraisal itself. You know, what's the cap rate? What should be the discounts for lack of marketability, lack of control? If there's a large positive capital account that's built up in the investor balance sheet, that aggregator is going to likely take the position that that needs to be monetized and turned into cash and included in either analysis. Refinance needs and objectives, use of reserves. Where do the reserves go? Do they stay with the property? Should they be included in the distribution? Should we be liquidating? All of it is, you know, somewhat contrived, but you know, you have a 100-page partnership agreement, and you know, people will argue there's room for interpretation. On the nonprofit side, I think some of the bigger considerations are really the ROFR. Do you have a ROFR? What does it say? Is there anything in there that requires it to be a bona fide offer from a third party? As everybody may know, you know, Section 42 creates this safe harbor. It just says that the credits are not going to be denied if you give a nonprofit a right of first refusal for debt plus taxes. It doesn't provide really anything else in terms of what that right looks like when it makes its way into somebody's partnership agreement. So you have a variety of different ROFRs with a variety of different considerations, and you have a lot of investors now saying, well, wait a minute, this is a common law, right of first refusal, so it should require what the particular state requires for any ordinary right of first refusal. So they'll say, you need to have a bona fide offer from a third party. Well, not if my contract doesn't say my contract doesn't say that. Congress intended for this to be easy. They intended for this to be, does the partnership have a manifest intent to sell? Have you decided to sell? Yeah, we have. Well, then let the nonprofit exercise the ROFR. If you've got an NEF or an enterprise, or you know, hopefully an original investor who's in your deal, who's still out there trying to do good in the community and do good with future work, they're not going to fight it. But you know, the aggregator says, I want to put up as many hurdles to avoid a trigger of that ROFR as is possible. And so that's I guess the biggest considerations on both sides of those coins.
I do want to point out that there is legislation pending in Congress that would do a couple of things around the ROFR. One, for deals going forward after the legislation is enacted, the right of first refusal, instead of instead of the uncertainty about what that means, it would just be a purchase option for future deals that nonprofits enter into. And secondly, it would clarify for existing deals that when it refers to property being transferred in the right of first refusal, it means not just the real estate, but all the assets of the partnership, which importantly mean the reserve funds, the operating reserve fund and the capital reserve fund. And secondly, it would clarify that we don't mean bona fide third-party offer. We mean an offer that can be exercised by the general partner without the approval of the limited partner, and that would include by a related party. That language would apply clarifying existing law, but it would not override terms that are expressly provided in current agreements otherwise. So if it generally mimics, if the partnership agreement mimics the language in section 42, this provides clarity. If the partnership agreement already goes into that detail, there's really nothing, at least legislatively, that would be done about that. Let me ask you, we're coming to the end here. Is there anything, Mike, Ellen, Dave, that you want to add? Any closing thoughts or any questions you want to pose to each other?
I guess I don't really. I mean, I think for me, closing thought would be know your deal, understand what your rights are, be prepared, get ready, understand who your partner is. If you have any of those red flags, if you're seeing things come across your desk from Wentwood, Alden Torch, Boston Financial Investment Management, Hunt Capital Partners, all of whom I have had their extensive litigation experience with the organizations that they now control or have an ownership interest in, be mindful of what's out there. Lots of these organizations have in-house legal counsel who train their disposition staff. You may be talking to a lawyer on the other side at year 12 and you don't even know it. And I'm a lawyer and I'm telling you, be careful of us. But, you know, we wish you all the best, and those are my closing thoughts.
And if you have a lot of money and you have a dispute, hire David. That would be another.
That's
Bobby,
a good plug.
I would just add, you know, that if you think you have a problem, talk to your own attorney. And also that this is an issue to raise with the allocating agencies, with the state allocating agencies, that this is a growing concern. They need to hear this loud and clear so that they can think about whether there are policies and practices that they can adopt to try to deter some of this activity. So we're sounding that alarm and encourage stakeholders to do the same. And I will just say that if people have, this is a pretty brief presentation on a big topic. So if folks want more information, they can reach out to me and I'm happy to connect you with others that are focused on this and share more information.
Mike, any closing thoughts?
Just one that for the new deals out there, you kind of know the add this to your due diligence. Like Bobby said before, maybe you know it's not just the top dollar that you're getting, but look at your investor, and if you know, find the ones that are going to work for you. So
Okay. Well, I want to thank the panelists today. It was a good discussion. As Ellen said, only the beginning of a discussion. There's a lot more to talk about, and you can reach out to the panelists and to me to learn more if you are interested. So thank the panelists. And I want to thank everybody for attending, and Brianna, thank you as well.
Yes, thank you, Mike, Bobby, Dave, and Ellen for sharing your experiences and what you all are seeing at your organizations. I just want to remind everybody, we have 2 more sessions left coming up at 2 after a break. There's COVID and construction, and also there is a session called the other credits, which will address state housing credits, historic credits, and opportunity zones. So go to your agendas and we will wrap up for the day, but thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.